Good afternoon. This is your Pan-African show called Afreeqa with your host Katsalork Sefu. Today is a special day. As you know, May we celebrated 60 years of the Organization of African Unity starting, and then a week later, Gash Katama Ifru's son came out with a beautiful book. And today I got the opportunity to actually sit down with him and have a great conversation. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Makonnen Katama. I'm the son of Ato Katama Ifru. I just did a biography on his life, and now it's out there so that everyone can read it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So now before we dive into how or why we met, I would like you to take us through the journey of you growing up, especially being the son of Gash Katama Ifruz, and just your schooling life and so on, and how you came to this point.
When we were kids, of course, our dad was around. He was around until I was almost 7. And then, 1966 happened, the coup d'etat, where the military took over. That's when he became a prisoner for 8.5 years. But, as a kid, even though we knew that he wasn't there, and it was really a sad moment, but then, you had to live. And we went to school. We went to the same school, actually. And it was good because there was a good support system there. Teachers, our friends, they were really good. So I spent my time in school and played football. They call it soccer in America. I did, athletics and all that stuff. So it was pretty good. I mean, as far as the school side was concerned. But coming home, of course, you understand that it was just one parent in the house, and the other parent was forcefully taken from the house. So that was, you always were reminded of that. Yeah. And that's how it was growing up.
Wow. So he actually went to prison for 7 years or 8 years?
8.5 years.
How old were you when he came out?
15.
Wow, you were still young.
I was still young. But the best part of it is I had 1 year left in school, a year and so left. So he got to see me in school. He got to see me playing football. He got to see me in sports day, actually winning races too. So which was very cool. It was nice to introduce him to my teachers and my friends. It was a very proud moment to have him at the school.
So you finished high school, and then like everybody, you migrated, right? So you went to school abroad. So if you could take us through that journey, what you decided to actually become. Yeah,
well, obviously there was this influence. So most of us studied political science. I first went to Michigan, Hope College, where he studied. I stayed there for a bit. The cold was too much for me. So I went back. I finished my school at GW, George Washington University. I studied political science. So, and then I employed at, for instance, the International Republican Institute, State Department, USAID, and all that stuff. It was a good journey. Political science actually did wonders for me. And that's why I'm interested in writing my dad's biography as well.
Ah, that's very interesting. So you have 3 siblings?
Yes, I do.
You are 4 boys?
Yes.
So you're telling me all of you got into the political science?
Yeah, all of us studied political science, and it was his influence basically.
That's I was just coming to that.
Yeah.
He must have had quite an influence on all of you. So at what point, the reason why I'm asking you is we all have our backgrounds, and then one child somehow goes into whatever the parent used to do. So I would like to know when you actually decided to get into his life story. What made you decide that you even should write about his biography?
When I was young, of course, you knew the circumstances that he was taken. He was a political prisoner. So that question, why, always came up. Why? And then you start digging in, you start asking. I started with my mom, and there was my grandmother. So, and then I started hearing positive stories. And then I started talking to his friends and people around us. And everything that you hear is that this guy had actually done not only for his country, but for his continent. So I said, it's really a shame that, you know, there's this story and it's not being told. So for me, especially after he was released from prison, that's when, you know, I started talking to him and I saw the personality, the humbleness. And that's when I decided, you know, this story has to be told.
The title of your book, or I should say biography, is Katama Ifru, a champion of peace, progress, and Pan-Africanism. How did you come up with that title?
Let me tell you, there were several titles.
Okay.
But I gave the manuscript to my son. He's 19. He's studying political science as well.
Wow.
Well, he's taking courses. I don't know what he's going to do later. But he looked at it, and he's reading about African politicians like the Lumumbas and stuff. And he came to me one day and he said, you know, after reading it, he got so much into it. He said, you know, people talk about Pan-Africanism, but your dad actually did the work. So he said he's the champion. He came up with the title, which was the most wonderful thing ever. Sure. Yeah, my son Yilma. So, yeah.
So, well, now we're going to have to back up since you just mentioned your son. So, can you tell us, you're married, you've got children?
Yeah. My wife is Lily Sabseve, and I have two sons. The oldest is Yilma, and the youngest is Malakai, and wonderful kids.
How old is the youngest?
The youngest is 15.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into your dad's story.
Sure.
You know, for people that don't know, that need to know.
Absolutely.
In what way was Ethiopia's foreign policy impacted when Emperor Haile Selassie appointed Gash Katama Ifru as the head of Ethiopia's foreign minister?
Well, at first, I think what people have to understand is that, you know, when the divide, Casablanca and Monrovia group was there, Ethiopia was part of the Monrovia group, very conservative government back then. It took a young Pan-Africanist to be appointed in the foreign ministry to change that. And in '61, when he was appointed, he advised the emperor, and the emperor listens. That's the most amazing thing. And it was a great partnership. So he decided to end the membership, and thus paving the way to bridging the gap between the two groups. And as far as changing other things, is like it was more of we moved to the middle. As being conservative, it was non-alignment. You know, he became a member of that. So the government basically went into the middle and sometimes to the left, like accepting China in the United Nations and having diplomatic relations with China, because most Western nations didn't want us to have that, but we did. So the emperor basically changed also, which is, I think, the influence of Katama.
Your dad's influence, yeah. When did the Conference of Foreign Ministers of the African States start?
May 15th, 1963, here in Addis Ababa. That's where everything was done, basically, the charter. I mean, the Ethiopian government brought a charter that had some ideals of the Monrovia group and the Casablanca group. They put it together. There was so much discussion. I have read the entire verbatim of the exchanges, which was incredible, including the leaders. So it was on May 15th, 1963.
When did Ato Katama's office receive invitations from the two groups?
In 1962. Previous to that, in 1961, he had gone to the United Nations saying, you know, Africa needs to have an organization. So this is way before, you know, people actually thought about it. And basically saying that, you know, this organization would help us in coming up with our own solutions, African solutions, and that was it. But in '62, like they did previously, they used to send letters. And when they sent letters back then, you know, we decided, okay, this is it, we're Monrovia. But now he said, let's accept the Monrovia group, let's go there, and maybe lobby to have the next one in Addis. Well, he had a plan. But yeah, it's '62.
You know, when the OAU, or now AU, is usually mentioned, this is something, by the way, that's always bothered me also, because I thought that our emperor actually had a big part in actually setting up that whole organization. And when we never hear his emperor's name when you hear the African Union mentioned or anything that goes on. Therefore, I started an event because of that. But then, now, we're also not hearing your dad, because your dad also had a huge part, if not more than his emperor, because he was the one that was convincing the emperor. So what did your dad, Gash Katama Ifru, mean when he said, only a few are aware of the hard work and effort that brought about the creation of the OAU?
Well, you know what he meant? He meant that obviously there was so much work that was put in, so much work. I mean, we're talking about huge personalities like Kwame Nkrumah, Tubman on the other side, you know, Azikiwe on the other side. So to bring these people together was, I think, the most amazing diplomatic effort. And it was done. But unfortunately, nobody really knows the details. And hence, that's why I wrote the book, part of it. But unfortunately, even during the emperor's time, the OAU was just summed up as Emperor Haile Selassie, under his government, created the Organization of African Unity. Details were not out there for some reason. I don't know why. But when you look at the Western world, the details are always there. Like, for instance, when America began diplomatic relations with China, which was a big deal for them. You know, sentence, it was Nixon. Chapters, it was Kissinger. So here we don't do that. We just assign it to one person. And then, of course, the Derg came, and they decided that nothing good was done prior to 1974. So they destroyed the history. They didn't want the young people to know it. Now it's like as if the Monrovia and the Casablanca group story just happened yesterday. That's how we are telling the story now. But this happened in 1963, in 62, 61. So that was what he meant when he said, nobody knows. And nobody knew, basically. And
I guess we also didn't show effort to know. True. I think that also is key. So when did Dr. Kwame Nkrumah introduce the concept of African unity to the continent? And why did you think they didn't accept it?
Well, you know...
Was it before or after? Actually, I would like to...
Well, he brought the concept, and right after he brought it, of course, there was a group that was formed in response to the Casablanca group. At first, it was Ghana, Guinea, Mali Union, and those are the three most important leaders. The rest joined, like Egypt and Algeria. It was later. But when he did bring that concept, it was a radical move back then, you know, like countries like Liberia, very close to the West. So countries like that, of course, did not accept a union right away. So they said, no, we have to wait. You know, we have to know each other before we do this, you know, gradually. But with Kwame Nkrumah, you know, he had a set idea. You know, he wanted to do it right away. He couldn't sell it, unfortunately, because of the politics. And, you know, there were so many things that, you know, and then one group accused the other of subversion. So many things happened then, to a point where they weren't even talking. So that was what happened. The Monrovia group was introduced. I mean, that was the reaction to the Casablanca group.
Okay. So as the foreign minister, Gash Katama Ifru was given full autonomy to embark on a long journey across Africa with the emperor's letter of invitation. How successful was he? And did he go around by then, there were 32 countries that were independent, so did he go around all the 32 countries?
He did, which was amazing. You know, there was an instance when the wing was clipped by a tree, and it was really, I mean, and the planes were not as good as they were today. So he went and saw 32 leaders, and some were apprehensive, because how can the Monrovia group sit down with the Casablanca group? They never did that. So he had to convince them, you know, that it would be okay to be under the same roof. And they listened. And I think they knew that deep down, you know, he was a Pan-Africanist. He meant well for the country, for the continent. And he did it. And when I really think about it now, 32 leaders, accepting and coming with the political atmosphere. With, you have to look at it in context. It was really bad. The politics was bad, but he managed.
He did. Even now, think about it. Would it be that easy to get 32 heads of state? You know what I mean?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
that was
not.
just, that was remarkable. Can you tell us about the August 1963 Dakar Foreign Ministers Conference regarding the location of the OAU's headquarters? I think that was the discussion, right?
Yes. So that conference was meant to deal with where should the OAU headquarters be. And as you know, we had done so much. So we thought that it should be in Addis. Francophone countries thought that it should be in Dakar. Nigeria believed that it should be in Nigeria, because in Lagos, because this is a huge prize, and sometimes we take things for granted. But having the OAU, the AU here, is many countries wanted it. So that was where everything was decided. But it wasn't easy, because there were many nations that decided to vote for Senegal. He had to talk to all those countries, all those foreign ministers. He had to lobby. And I think he got, 20 or so above what was needed. And that's where Addis Ababa became the headquarters.
The meeting was in August?
Yes.
1963?
Yeah.
That's why I was a bit confused, because it was May that the OAU was actually formed.
Yeah.
But they still didn't know where they wanted the headquarters.
No, they didn't.
I got you. I just remembered what I had wanted to ask you earlier.
Sure.
When your dad when Gashkata Maifu was going around with that letter that the emperor wrote.
Yeah.
What did that letter say? Do we know?
It's in the book. Basically, it's inviting the leaders, and asking them to come to Addis, and that the conference would be successful if they made it to Addis.
Now, one thing that I read, which I thought was just so cool about your dad, was that he supported a lot of Africa's freedom fighters. So what I want to know is how he even found out that they were freedom fighters. I just want to know that little story. Well,
first of all, I think obviously they approached Ethiopia, because Ethiopia has been independent for quite some time. It has been that example for Africa, being independent all those years. Yeah. So they did contact them, but as far for instance, like Jomo Kenyatta, neighbor. So Ethiopia was very interested to see what was going on, and my father had very good relations with, the likes of Jomo Kenyatta, the likes of Nelson Mandela, Kenneth Kaunda, Mugabe back then. And he saw it that, that it was his problem, not only theirs. It's like they had to be independent. He said that our independence is meaningless unless we were all independent. So that was his attitude. And so he made sure that we gave scholarships. And of course, about Nelson Mandela's training here, the passport that was given to him. So he did as much as he could to help their struggle.
Yeah. It's so funny that we talked about it, because recently I read somewhere that when Nelson Mandela was actually arrested and was put into prison, the two things that they found in his pocket was your dad's picture and the Ethiopian passport.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's pretty deep.
I think it's the coolest thing ever.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is. And it shows you that one person, you know, at that level of government, that can change things. Just one person. Could you imagine if there were many Katamai Frus in Ethiopia, many Katamai Frus in Africa, what we could be, what we can achieve? That's the thing. Yeah.
Would you say Gash Katamai was the architect behind the OAU and that he is an unsung hero?
You know, as far as bringing the idea, I would always give it to Kwame Nkrumah, obviously. But putting Kwame Nkrumah's dream into reality, I think that was Katamai. I mean, you'll understand it when you read the book. And obviously, he's the most unsung hero. And hopefully this book will change that.
So the main reason you wrote this book is?
The main reason is that, you know, when my dad set out to do work, he didn't do it for his family. Yeah. He did it for his country, his beloved country, Ethiopia, his beloved continent, Africa. So I have to share his work. You know, people have to know that there's this story, that there was this man that was fighting for them, and this is what he did. And that's the story, basically, yeah.
It's interesting that you, now he died in 84, correct?
94.
94, sorry. So since then, I mean, your father did so much, as you said, not only for Ethiopia, but the continent. It's quite interesting that nobody approached you to write the story about him. Now, as children, I'm asking this question also from my own. Are we supposed to write our parents' stories? I mean, it's a good thing that we do, if we do, but should we be the ones?
Look, 23 years ago, I did a website, oaucreation.com, and I put, you know, the history of the OAU and how the headquarters ended up here in Ethiopia, and a little biography there. But I never wanted to write a book because I thought after people looked at it, maybe historians would come to me. Because I waited for 23 years.
I know.
So I had to take up the responsibility. Yeah. Kids should not be writing about their parents' stories, because especially if their parents worked hard for their country and their continent. That's not my... That's not he didn't do it for me. He did it for everyone. So I think we have to sort of examine ourselves, and we have to tell ourselves, you know what? This is our history. We should own this. We have to do it ourselves too. I mean, kids should not be doing this, to be honest. Because for me, writing it, there were certain parts where I would read and I would just stop for at least a month or two, like the prison diaries. That was too much, for instance. Yeah. So I'd stop and I'd write again because there's no one to write it. I have to do it, yeah. I had to do it.
We come to the Organization of the African Unity, AU currently. It's celebrated 60 years this year since its inception. Now, would you say that it's still, because when it opened, it was like the Pan-African organization. Would you say that it's still the Pan-African organization that opened up with the same ideas, the same feeling that the African leaders had then, today?
I'm going to say this in a way that I'm not going to offend anyone, but we're talking about Kwame Nkrumah, we're talking about Haile Selassie, we're talking about Sekou Touré, we're talking about giants back then who felt that anything in the continent was of utmost importance. For instance, conflicts. We've seen Rwanda. What did the Organization of African Unity do, or the AU for that matter? We have seen so many conflicts today that have not been touched by the AU or the OAU. But back then, Algeria, Morocco, Congo, Nigeria, these guys were so much into the Pan-African spirit. And I don't see it now. I don't see the spirit now. Maybe there are many. I mean, at least from what I see, I haven't seen them trying to tackle issues with that same spirit. So we'll see. I mean,
I know it's kind of sad because, especially for you, but in whole for Africans, because seeing where it started and where it is now, sometimes you kind of like, okay, are we going the same direction that they had wanted us to go? Because you would think by now we would be a united Africa.
Yeah.
And I don't think we are.
And I think one is also not knowing our history as well. I think that's a major issue, because who has thought about the Organization of African Unity, at least the 10 years after its inception? Are we taught that in school? We're not. So whenever these kids grow up, they don't know that history. If they did, if they knew the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Sekou Touré's, the Katamaifus for that matter, the Haile Selassie's, maybe, you'd see that spirit. So you have young officials now, and they have no concept of what happened back then. So I don't blame them, to be honest with you.
True.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting, because I actually had interviewed my aunt who worked at the OAU for 34 years. And that was the last thing she said when I said, okay, what do you desire? She said, the one thing I desire while I'm still alive is to see them in school teaching.
My dream now is to have my book in high schools here in Ethiopia and universities. And I'm going to go around Africa trying to introduce it.
Yes.
Because you know why? We need to know our history. We need to know that there were people who were passionate about their continent. It's not about talk, it's about doing stuff. And what did the OAU do? It helped the emancipation of Africa. Like, before it was just countries simply running around trying to do it by themselves. But here it was under the same roof, same voice. We can do that. Unity is the best thing ever. Unity, when you are unified, you can tackle anything.
Anything, yeah. We've seen how the Europeans handle their affairs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I don't know why we can't even learn from watching them.
But then again, we don't know that we had done it before. That's the thing. So once we start teaching this in schools, I think Africa would be a better place. It would be a continent that will go for it again.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, it shouldn't really be only in private schools, correct? No. If you put in the book, it has to definitely be in government schools too.
Definitely, majority of kids go there. Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I wasn't even thinking about private schools, to be honest with you.
Brilliant.
My thing is mostly government schools. My dad went to a government school. So for private schools, I think they have the resources. They can, their parents have the resources. They can, my concern is government schools.
That's beautiful. So we've come to the end of our discussion, and we went all over.
We did.
Is there anything that you think that we haven't said that needs to be said?
No, it's just that I think basically trying to get your kids involved in African affairs, basically, get your kids books about Africa, because I think we're isolated again now, like we were prior to 61, 60, whatever. So I think it's better to introduce your kids to the African continent, get them to love and own their African identity. And this is not only for here.
Exactly.
I'm talking about the diaspora as well.
Yeah.
So I see that. I see us saying we're Ethiopians. We're not only Ethiopians, we're Africans. Yeah. And we should love our African identity as much as we love Ethiopia.
Yeah, Ethiopia. Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, coming to our studio and being able to have this conversation with us. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This is your Pan-African show called Afreeqa with your host, Katsala Seifu. We'll see you at 4 p.m. on Saturdays on African Renaissance television services. Thank you.